Hi, I'm Dorothea, and this is your Wednesday Word Share. And today we are going to begin a series on the book of James. I'm for sure going to go all the way through chapter 1. I'm undecided about going through the other chapters, but so far, just in chapter 1, I probably have a couple of months worth of teaching in that. Today we're going to cover verses, I think, 2 through 5. And I've actually also, one of the things that I wanted to do for the new year was to begin memorizing more scripture. And I have begun with James chapter 1. And so there, starting in verse 2, he says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. And let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. If anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." So those are the first few opening verses of the book of James, and I want to break it down a little bit because one of the things I absolutely love about the book of James is that it takes the lofty ideas of the gospel, the ideas of loving everyone, the ideas of being an evangelist and witnessing, the ideas of all of those things. It brings it down into a very practical application of your faith. In one place, James says, "So you believe? Well, the demons believe and they tremble." So he doesn't let anybody off the hook just by saying, "Oh, I believe in God. Oh, I believe in Jesus. I prayed a prayer once." Well, that's not good enough to James. James is all about taking what you believe and putting it into action. And that is what he begins to talk about here in his first chapter. In the first chapter, he's introducing us to several topics that he's going to expound upon later on in the rest of his letter. As we have numbered it and call it chapters and verses, he addresses it later in one of the other chapters. So he begins to talk about the trials of life. And he says what your attitude should be when you are in the middle of a trial is you should count it joy. Why in the world should we be joyful when we find ourselves in various trials and difficulties? Because none of that stuff is fun. Who wants to be caught up in the middle of that? Well, not me. So what James is saying as he goes on, I'm sorry, I keep getting notifications, it's a little distracting. So what he's saying is, you know what? Something is happening inside of you. And because of that, you can be joyful. And so he goes on to tell us that our trials have a purpose, and that purpose is that it is working patience in us. How many times have we said, "Oh my goodness, I need more patience"? Well, here you go. Trials are going to bring out the patience. And it says you are going to experience trials. There's no way to escape it. It says when you fall into various trials, you can't avoid it. And I also think it's interesting the wording that he uses there where it says fall into. Well, you didn't really go looking for it. It just happened. Life is full of opportunities everywhere we go to fall into various trials. It just happens. And so when you fall into, it means that you become completely immersed in it. It's all around you. It's everything. But here's the key. Testing and trials are a way for God to bring maturity and completeness in you. So the word that says perfect, let patience have its perfect work in you, that you will be perfect. That doesn't mean that you're going to be without error. It doesn't mean that you're going to be without anything. You're never going to make a mistake or anything. What it means is you're going to be mature. That word perfect that's used there means mature and complete, which means you're going to be lacking nothing. So that's the work of patience, and that is the reason why we can be joyful in trials, because we know that there's a purpose, that God is doing something in us. Remember over there in Romans chapter 8, which I did a whole series on Romans chapter 8, and it's verse 29. It says, "For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son." So, my friends, that is what Jesus is doing. That is what the Father is doing. Every time you go through something difficult, you can count it joy, because you know, you can be confident and assured that God is working in you to conform you to the image of his Son. And that's what it's doing with patience. And that is what it means to be mature and complete. That means to be more and more like Jesus. So it also says that trials are a test of our faith. And so I want you to take a minute, and I want you to consider maybe some of the trials that you're going through, or some that you've gone through recently, and ask yourself, how did that trial test my faith? And I think sometimes when you realize that God also wants us to grow in faith, to know that when we go through trials, difficulties, tribulations, we can know that God is opening our eyes to a place in our life where we need to grow in that faith. And so that's another way to be encouraged in the trial and to have joy in it. It's also to prove that God is who he says he is, and that God can do what he says he can do. When we go through these things, that we have to rely on God throughout the whole process if we're going to come out of it victorious. And that's God's plan, is that we will come out. So the last thing that I want to talk about is how God is an approachable and a loving God. Because that last verse that we talked about, verse 5, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it'll be given to him." So you have to realize that the nature and the character of God is so open, it's so generous, it's so overflowing, that if you need anything at all you have to do is go to him and ask. And that word liberally just basically means within abundance and overflow, without any restriction. He's not holding anything back. He is not being stingy, or he is not being greedy, or and then that word reproach is talking about he's not going to ridicule you. He's not going to make fun of you or anything for coming and needing something and asking. He's like, if you need it, you come and you ask it, and he is going to give it to you. So that's all for today. Next week, though, we're going to pick up with the next verse that is going to give you the clue to the one thing that may hinder God from being able to answer your request for wisdom or for any other thing. So we'll get to that next time. In the meantime, God bless you, and I pray that you are growing in relationship with the Lord and growing in his word.